Hello everyone and welcome back to my strategy show. Since this is the first session we have in 2016, I would love to wish a very happy new year to all of you. I hope that this year will be very successful to you, that you will accomplish your goals. And if you had written a New Year's resolution list, let me know. And if so, did this list include some chess accomplishments like do you want to improve your chess this year? Do you want to study more on chess 24? Do you want to watch my series on strategy and on the middle game? Please tell me in the chat. What I want to tell you is that I'm very happy because I heard from many of you that you received a premium membership as a Christmas gift. And I was like, wow, that's really a cool gift. And you will be able to use your premium membership for this course as well, because this show has two parts. The first is what you're watching right now, is the lecture part. It's where we study together. And then several times during a month, we will have training tournaments where you can practice what you learned, because practice makes mastery. So we should practice what we learn during these lessons. And that's why today from 8:30, that's our first training tournament on the hanging pawns topic. I will give you the link where you can sign up. I will copy it here in the chat. So please sign up for the tournament. I'll be commentating your games, your moves, what you do well, how you are applying the plans we learned in this course. So this is the first special training tournament on our hanging pawns topic. It will be about the first session and today's session. So you can try to achieve everything that we learned in these lessons. Please sign up for the training tournament. And thanks for joining for today's show. Before we start with the spectacular games we have for today, I'd like to recap a bit of what happened in the first session and what's this show about in general in case you are new. So as you can see from the title, we're gonna learn about middle games. And we are learning about middle games because you all know a lot of openings and we have a lot of good opening series on Chess 24, but it's not so easy to learn middle games because you cannot memorize middle games. So what we are doing here is that we try to understand middle game positions. You need to understand certain ideas, plans, patterns in order to apply them in your games, because the position will never be exactly the same that you saw in other games, but if you understand other famous games, you can apply those ideas in your games. So we build these middle game structures on the pawn structure because the pawns define the position. Therefore, we group the middle games into several pawn structure groups. The first is the hanging pawns, then isolated pawns. We will have Sicilian type of pawn structure, French type of pawn structure, closed structures, everything. We will include everything. So regardless what your opening repertoire is, you can learn a lot from these shows because these are general ideas that you can apply in the middle game so that you will not be lost in the middle game, but you will know what you should play for, how to place your pieces. So let me just see if everything is okay, if you are all here in the chat. I'll try to read it and talk at the same time. It's not so easy, but I'll try. Yes, we will still learn about hanging pawns because what we learned in the first session was the d5 breakthrough, and today we will see other ideas so that you will not be like, what if I cannot play d5? Am I lost? Well, you will not be lost. There are other ideas to play for. So just to quickly sum up, I will need a board for this. Hanging pawns. Those guys marked in green are the hanging pawns. They are pawns side by side, not supported by other pawns. Central pawns, we are not talking about pawns elsewhere. These are central pawns, hanging pawns. And it doesn't matter if white has the hanging pawns or black. What we care about is playing with or against the hanging pawns. So just to make it simple, in every game that we see, it is white who has the hanging pawns and it is black who plays against it. But in your games, it might be that you are black and you have hanging pawns. You will still need to apply the same ideas that we see in these shows. So these are the hanging pawns. And what we saw in the first session, you can check it in our shows page or on YouTube on the Chess 24 channel, was the d5 breakthrough. We prepared it by placing our rooks like this, one facing the queen and the other supporting the other pawn, and then we could manage to play d5 in the right moment. You see that all the white pieces are active, and with d5 we open up the position. We either open it up to create a strong passed pawn like in this Aronian game. Look at this pawn, look how powerful it is. It's almost a queen already. It's on d7. So Aronia won this game because he managed to create this extremely strong passed pawn on d7. And in other examples we saw that we also play d5 to open up the position and attack black's king. So here, for instance, in the Yusupov game, after d5, white could play knight g5. The queen is on the long diagonal. The bishop from e4 is attacking the h7 pawn. So the game was soon lost after h6, bishop h7, and this nice piece sacrifice, if you remember. If not, check the first session. The point is that d5 was the main idea that we saw in the first session, and today we are going to see games where maybe you can play d5, but maybe you can play something else as well. d5 is not the only plan for playing with the hanging pawns. Before we start, those of you who are new, you should know that I require two things from my pupils. That is, you should think, because we will stop many times, and you will need to try to figure out the right move, the right continuation, the right plan. Because I want you to work, you need to use your brain and you need to make an effort, because this is the way to learn. If I always tell you the right solution without letting you think, you will not learn much from it. You need to comprehend these positions. That's why we will stop many times. And no matter if you are watching this live right now or you replay the video later on, I still want you to think and just do it for yourself. You don't need to tell me the solution in the chat. And even if you don't get the correct move, it doesn't matter. The point is that you thought about the position, you tried, and after that, when we discuss the solution, you will understand much more from it. So please do that for me. The second thing is to have fun, because this show is also an entertainment. At least it's supposed to be an entertainment. So I hope you're having a good time. I'm not here to torture you. I want you to have fun while you're studying chess. Then, once again, before we start, if somebody in the chat, this time I ask, you guys in the chat could sum up the characteristics of the position for the player with the hanging pawn and for the player playing against the hanging pawn. Like, let's say this position, what is this position for white? What are the general characteristics of this position? What about black? I will give you a moment. And if you're watching the video, please also try to summarize what is good in this position for white, what shall he play for, and what shall black play for. In the meantime, I apologize for my voice. I got a cold, so I'll try to not to use a tissue very often, but unfortunately, I'm suffering a bit with this winter flu. I thought I was immune to it because I played the European Team Championship in Iceland and I was completely fine. Then I recorded in the Chess24 office in Hamburg, completely fine with 0 degrees, and now that I'm back in Spain, I get a cold. That's pretty sad. So white has lines, diagonals, some central control. Black should provoke weakness. White has more space, very good, more activity. And black will try to exchange pieces. That's it, very good. Hanging pawns are together. White should be looking to move d5. Black should try to destroy the pawn structure. Very good, guys. Very nice. Also, white can try to make a passed pawn. Yes, you did sum up very well the main ideas. So white, because in this case it's white who has the hanging pawns, has more space, more active pieces, and this is a mobile center, so he should look for playing d5 in the right moment, or c5 if it works. But what he should avoid is to fix these pawns or to let them be torn apart, and that's what black wants. Black wants these pawns to be weak. They are not protected by other pawns, so if black manages to trade off pieces to end up in an endgame, and play e5 or b5 in the right moment. That means that these pawns will be weaker, they will be torn apart, they will be fixed, and if they lose their flexibility, then it will be easier to attack them in general. So, very good, mighty king. Black should try to get the b5 break. That's what I've just said, but I know that you didn't hear it because there's a bit of a difference between what I say and what you write right now. There's a bit of a lag between the broadcast video, the time when I say it, and the time when you hear it. I don't know how these technical things works, but it's something like that. Let's start with our first game of today, and once again, we're gonna see a Kasparov game as our starter. I love Kasparov's games, even though I'm a strategy. I admire Kasparov's play too. And in the hanging pawns, since many times it's about dynamic play, it's very good to see Kasparov's games. This is the game he played against Robert Fontaine, who is now a French grandmaster, but at the time of this game, he was still a child, because this is a simul. And I didn't pick this game because it's a simul and he plays against a child. I picked it because the ideas that we'll see in this game are very instructive. This is the world champion, at that time world champion Kasparov playing with the white pieces. This opening we saw in previous games, it transposes to a semi-Slav. And after these moves, I told you that we are not discussing the opening here. Simply we want to achieve, we want to reach our middle game position, the hanging pawns. So if you see these pawns, d4, c4, d5, c5, in many openings it occurs on the board, and whether white or black, but somebody will usually end up either having an isolated pawn or hanging pawns, because once we exchange those pawns in the center, then there will be hanging pawns on the board or isolated pawns. Let's see after rook fd1. This is indeed what happens, because after c takes, e takes, a6 was played in the game. Kasparov brings his other rook. This is what you learned, how to place our rooks, supporting those hanging pawns. Bishop d6, and now knight e5, because this is a very nice square for the knight when you have hanging pawns. We don't have them yet, but this is the square anyway that we learned, and now we reached our hanging pawn structure. The rooks are already well placed, the knight on e5, perfect. All our pieces are developed, and here you should start thinking, because after queen c7, a beautiful knight on e5 is hanging. So what to do about this hanging knight? Do we want to capture on d7? Do we want to move the knight? Do we want to protect it? Let me know. I give you a bit of time to think about this. Let's see who will be the first. So what to do about our e5 knight that is currently hanging? Louis says to protect the knight. That's okay, but how to protect it? I can see now that Pawn Grabber and Mighty King suggest, and also Philang, to play f4, and that's indeed what Kasparov did. And this is also a very typical idea with the hanging pawns. When you have hanging pawns and you place a knight on e5 with many pieces on the board, f4 is usually a good move. Whenever you play f4 in other positions, to make sure that your king is okay, because this move weakens the diagonal, it weakens the a7, g1 diagonal, but right now there's nothing wrong on that diagonal, so f4 protects the e5 knight, and black can't really capture this, sorry, I'm clicking everywhere. Black can't really capture on e5 anymore, because since he's not winning any pawn with this capture, we will simply take back with the f-pawn, opening the f-file, and this knight, this poor knight from f6, doesn't really have any good squares. It would need to go to e8, and then bishop a3 would even win an exchange. So it's not only that the knight is so poor on e8, but it also blocks the rook's squares. The rook cannot move, the rook is trapped. And f4 protects the knight. Black cannot capture on e5 with the knight either, because that would be a fork after f takes e5. It would lose a piece. What can he do? Well, he should try to bring his rooks. Rook a c8 is a normal move. And here, once again, you should tell me how to continue. Think about what to play next, because all our pieces are fine, but we should progress. We should somehow manage to build up an attack against Black's king. How can we do that? Some of you suggest g4, but careful about those kind of moves, because even though it looks nice, very aggressive, but it has disadvantages as well. This move weakens the long diagonal, and that's where Black has a bishop. So look at this diagonal now. Even though Black cannot play queen c6 at the moment, in the future there could be troubles coming on the diagonal. So try to attack without weakening too much. f4 is already a move that weakens a bit our king, but we don't want to launch all those pawns, storm ahead with them. Try to attack without pushing the pawns in front of your king. d5 and c5, of course, are moves that we should always consider, because if d5 works or if c5 works, then it's really cool. Those are pawn advances that we should always think about when having the hanging pawns, such a mobile center. Always check whether you can play d5 or c5. But this moment is not the right moment for those pawn pushes. There are so many pieces protecting the d5 and c5 squares. We can't really make anything out of those moves yet. So let's just put it on the board in case you want to see d5. But first of all, now we are not protecting the e5 knight anymore. So Black doesn't even have to capture on d5. He can just capture, for instance, on e5, and that's a pawn up. So that's why, that is one of the reasons why d5 doesn't work here. And c5, well, the same, so many pieces protecting the square that he can just capture on c5, and everything is protected for Black. We don't have anything concrete yet, but we should regroup our pieces, because even though white pieces are very well placed, if we want to progress, if we want to bring more pieces to the king side to attack Black's king, then we need to make some maneuvers. For instance, one would be is this d3 bishop is a nice bishop, very nice bishop. I like it, but it takes away the square from the queen, from the rook. So what about moving this bishop from d3? Where could we place this bishop where it would still be an active piece, but it would allow our rook or queen to be placed somewhere else, to be placed in a more attacking way? Where can we move this bishop? Very good. Bishop b1. This is an idea that you should remember. So when we cannot play d5, when we cannot break through immediately, an idea that almost always works is to place our bishop on b1, and then we can play either queen c2 or queen d3 and attack this pawn on a7. Right now it's protected by the f6 knight, but it doesn't mean that it will be protected forever. So very, very usual plan, very standard plan is to build a bishop queen battery on the b1 h7 diagonal, attacking on h7. I also want you to see that the c4 pawn is never hanging thanks to this e5 knight. So Black cannot capture the pawn right now, and he cannot capture on e5 in order to capture the pawn, because we are so ready after bishop takes e5 either f takes or d takes. The knight doesn't have any good squares, so it would need to go to e8, trapping its own rook. Let's put it in red. It's a very bad piece. After bishop a3, we are winning an exchange again. Even if we wouldn't win the exchange, even if there was a pawn on a3 for white, still this position with the e8 knight and the rook on f8 without any possible moves is such a bad position. So black cannot capture on e5 almost ever, and therefore he will not be able to capture our pawn on c4. So bishop b1 you can definitely play. The pawn is not hanging ever. Black played rook f e8, and now it's your turn to think again. We played bishop b1 in order to build up a queen and bishop battery on the diagonal. That's what I said. But maybe in this position there's something better than queen d3. What could it be? If somebody can find this attacking idea, that's brilliant because it's not so usual. It's not an average idea. I want you to find a way to bring the rook into the attack. So think about bringing one of your rooks to the king side. To which square we could bring it and how. Find a nice rook maneuver. Rook d3 and rook h3, very good. So it doesn't matter, it doesn't mean that we will not play queen d3 later, but first we want to bring one more attacking piece to the king side, and that is the rook. So right now, rook d3, it's of course what Kasparov played. If it's about attack, Kasparov always made the very best moves. Rook d3, and this rook is heading to either g3 or h3. It will attack black's king. Remember this idea. It's also a very usual idea to see with the hanging pawns or with the isolated pawns, that we have a very beautiful knight on e5 supported by the d4 pawn and the f4 pawn. Then we have the bishop queen battery on the b1 h7 diagonal. We will soon have it, and the rook comes to play through the third rank. So we will swing this rook from d3 to h3. Knight f8 was played, and after rook h3 you can see that black will have to be defending that a7 pawn forever, because after queen d3 we already have 3 pieces attacking on a7, so he cannot go away with his knight. He played rook cd8, and Kasparov moved king h1. He's not in a hurry, and he just wants to make sure that nothing bad will happen to his king on that diagonal, because I already told you that f4 is a move that weakens the a7 g1 diagonal, so make sure that nothing happens to your king on that diagonal. It's useful to move out of that diagonal. And here, after knight g6, how shall we prevent the threat of black, which is knight takes f4? A pawn is hanging, and knight f4 would be a fork, so prevent it. How many options we have and which one is the best? In the meantime, I will have my favorite mint tea as usual. It's very good when you have a cold to drink a lot of tea. At least that's what I heard, so that's what I do. I've eaten a lot of fruits and I'm drinking mint tea. Let's see if you find the right way to protect this pawn and to avoid knight f4 fork. Careful about f5. The threat is not only this pawn. It's not only about capturing on f4, but knight f4 would be a fork, so if you push your pawn, it doesn't help. It will still give up the square for black. Just let's show it that after f5, knight f4 is still a very strong move. Suddenly black will be winning. Pay attention, don't blunder. After knight g6, as many of you said, rook f1 is the best move. So we make use of this rook as well. It was okay on the c5 while we were trying to play d5, but already we are playing on the king side. We don't care about d5, c5 anymore. We don't want to break through in the center anymore. What we want is to build a very strong attack on the king side. So we are bringing all our pieces to the king side. This rook defends the f4 pawn, and it also prepares an f5 push at a good moment. Maybe not now, maybe not in the near future, but f5 could also be in the air thanks to having this rook on the f5. So the more pieces, the better to the king side. Let's see how the game continued. Bishop b4, and this is a very important moment in the game. Our e5 knight is very strong. It's a beautiful knight, very well placed. The rook on h3 is also such a strong attacking piece. The bishop on b1. The diagonal is so important. The queen can attack sooner or later. On e2 it's okay because we can either play queen d3, or at some point when the f6 knight moves away, we could play queen h5. The rook on f1 is also okay, protecting the f4 pawn. But there are two more pieces that white has, and he could make use of those pieces too. Let's see how. Because Kasparov wanted his whole army to attack. So he's not satisfied having 5 attacking pieces. He wants all of his pieces to be part of this attack. So tell me, how can you activate, how can you make even more use of the c3 knight and the b2 bishop? I think some of you are already saying the right plan. I'm so proud of you guys. Indeed, we can play knight d1 in order to place this knight somewhere else, somewhere more active, somewhere closer to the king side. So the plan is knight e1, and that's knight d1, sorry. And that's of course what Kasparov played because he's heading to e3, and from e3 he can go to g4 towards black's king. Knight d1. This is the kind of move that if you make without having an idea behind it, without knowing why you make this move, then it just looks like a bad move. A knight on the rim is dim, that's true, but not here because this is just a temporary square for the knight. So we place the knight on d1, and next move we're gonna go to e3, and from there the knight will join the attack against black's king. And just by moving this knight from 3-8, we have the bishop's diagonal more free. So after knight d1, it's not only that we have this beautiful maneuver, knight e3 and then knight g4 probably, but also the b2 bishop has more possibilities in the attack. Maybe at some point we play d5 and this diagonal will open up, maybe. But after knight d1, for sure that the b2 bishop has also more future in this game. Protects the d4 pawn, protects the e5 square, and at some point we can try to break through with d5 and open up the diagonal for that bishop. Black played bishop a8. It's not so easy to play this position with black. It's really passive because white pieces are just getting better and better, and all that black can do is waiting. He doesn't have any chance to capture those hanging pawns. He can't really trade off any pieces because the only piece he could capture is the e5 knight, and you know that knight takes e5 is not a good move in this position. So he cannot trade off pieces, he can't capture the pawns. That's a very sad situation for black. After knight e3 and knight e4, it's already a moment to think a lot actually. Let me show you what if black played something else, not knight e4. He could have played, for instance, rook e7, and that's the case when we would just continue with the normal move, knight to g4. You know that we normally, the player with the hanging pawns normally doesn't want to trade off pieces, but we do want to trade off the opponent's best pieces. And here the opponent's best pieces are those that are defending the king. So f6, the f6 knight is the best defender in black's position, and we want to trade it. After exchanging this knight, Suddenly, the h7 square is much weaker. Suddenly, we can move our queen to h5, and suddenly, the only defender around black's king is the g6 knight, and that's not enough against 4 attacking pieces. So after rook e7, knight g4, we eliminate the defender. With knight g4, we want to see this f6 knight away from the board. That's the best piece. We want to exchange it. And this is a position where white is basically much better, if not winning already. That's why black tried instead knight e4, trying to create some kind of a counterplay. He wants to play knight d2, he wants to complicate the game. But here, what Kasparov played was knight g4. And it's an okay move, but instead of knight g4, he had something much stronger, and I'm sure that he would have made this move if it wasn't a simul, because in simuls, you don't have much time to think. The person who gives a simul should make each move after a few seconds of thinking, so he just made this knight g4 move and won the game in a different way. But instead of knight g4, you have a very strong move in this position, and I want you to find it. So think what other move could be possible here instead of knight g4. Some of you are suggesting queen h5, and that's true that it's very tempting. The knight has left the f6 square, so we could play queen h5, attack the h7 pawn. The only problem is that black will go back with the knight. So we would love to play queen h5 without having this knight on the board. What do you think about that? What do you think about eliminating the knight? Is it a good move? Bishop e4? I think I'm being tricky because I convinced you about bishop takes e4. Let's see. Let's see if it's good. Bishop takes e4. Bishop takes. That's the normal response. And after queen h5, well, we are attacking the h7 pawn. That's what we wanted. But it's not such a big deal because this e4 bishop is now a new defending piece. It can defend the h7 pawn too. So either h6, for instance, because thanks to this bishop, the g6 knight is not hanging, white is not winning anything. Well, it's a position where white is still, it looks like we are attacking, but thanks to this e4 bishop and the g6 knight, our attack is not very strong. So we want to eliminate that knight, but without giving this powerful bishop to black. How can we do that? Knight e4. We want to capture this knight, but not like this. We don't want to have a black bishop on e4. Can somebody figure out what's the strongest move here in this position? I let you think because it's not easy at all. I'm not sure if this move would have occurred to me either, because the idea is quite deep. It's what I already explained. We want to capture on e4 because we want to play queen h5, but we don't want black to have a strong bishop on e4. So first we will play, very good guys, all of you who said d5. First we play d5, sacrificing this pawn. So it's connected to our first topic too. Our first session was about the breakthrough with d5. We play d5, which opens up the diagonal for this bishop. That's good. But it's a sacrifice, it's a pawn sacrifice. After e takes d5, we've lost the pawn. But now, if we capture this knight, black has to take it with a pawn. And look at the difference. Now we have a very active bishop, the b2 bishop. The diagonal of this bishop has been opened. So this bishop is much better than it was before. And look at the other bishop, the a8 bishop. in the other position, in the other variation, it was a bishop on e4. It was a very powerful bishop, but now it's a poor piece in the corner, blocked by its own pawn on e4. So this pawn sacrifice was really worth it. Now we can play queen h5. There's no defending piece on e4. So black cannot play h6. Black will have to play knight f8. And now I want you to think again, because white's position is winning. It's like winning almost immediately. But you need to find a way to still improve the attack, because neither knight takes f7 nor queen takes h7. Those sacrifices don't work. Don't go crazy. Simply, you need to find a way to make the most of your pieces. The queen on h5 and the rook on h3 are already very good pieces, but the bishop is not participating yet. And also you should make something about the knight or knights, because it's beautiful on e5, but it's not threatening much. So let me see if somebody can figure out what's the best move here. We want to improve our bishop. We want to open the diagonal for the bishop, probably. And we want to find another square for the knight, because it's nice on e5. But right now, it's blocking the bishop's diagonal. Can somebody figure out what's the move? I think I've given you a lot of hints, so yes. Yes, it is knight fg4. It's a bit strange, because normally you would want to go forward with your pieces. So knight 3g4 is a much more normal move, but we don't care about making normal moves. We should find the best move, and the best move here is knight 5g4. Retreating move, but we retreat with the knight in order to open the bishop's diagonal. So now we have the whole long diagonal for our bishop, and this knight from g4 together with the bishop will attack black's king. Let me show you an example. For instance, rook d2. Black is trying to do something, attacking our bishop. Placing a rook on the second rank is always good, but in this position it doesn't matter, because white is winning anyway. You should find how. There are several good moves. There are several winning moves. I wonder which one would you pick? Which one do you think is the right way to finish the game here with white? You need to calculate. And many tempting moves, many tempting sacrifices. So calculate sacrifices. It's already the moment to sacrifice. How can you know that it's already the moment? Well, all the white pieces are attacking, almost all, except for the e3 knight. And, well, the f1 rook is there, not directly attacking the king, but all the white pieces are on the king's side. 4 of them are almost directly attacking the black king, and there's only one defending piece, the f8 knight. So if there are much more attacking pieces than defending pieces, then usually there's a very direct way to win the game, which is either bishop takes g7. Many of you have studied, congratulations. Also, bishop f6 is a good move. So congrats once again. And my favorite, but it's just because it's such a pretty check. I like this knight f6. All these moves are winning. It just depends on your taste. Which one would you play in a game? I want to show you why knight f6 is working. Knight f6 check. Black should capture this. After bishop takes f6, we have sacrificed the piece for a pawn, but it's not because of the pawn. We wanted to eliminate this g7 pawn, because now the black king is without any shelter. The g file is open, and if black plays, for instance, bishop e7 to try to trade this bishop, because it's such an annoying piece, this f6 bishop, then after knight g4 we are threatening knight h6 mate. I love this position because it's not so usual to see two minor piece mate when there are queens and rooks on the board. It would be more normal to give a mate with the queen, I believe. But Thanks to this powerful bishop on f6 and the knight heading to h6, black would be mated, so he has to play bishop takes f6, but now after knight f6, well, king g7 doesn't have because we have queen h6, and here I'm sure you can see the move. There's mate in 2, and there are 2 different ways to give mate in 2. Which one would you pick? Which one would you choose? Mate in 2? Very good, you've said both. One way to give mate is queen takes h7, such a beautiful queen sacrifice. This is a mate. Remember this type of mate. Then f6 knight protecting the h7 rook and taking the ga square away from the king. And also another mate would be queen takes f8, and after rook f8, the same mate. It's beautiful, isn't it? The point is that after d5, such a strong move. This is what Kasparov would have definitely played in a normal game. E takes, bishop takes e4, so we sacrifice the pawn in order to open the diagonal for our bishop and close the diagonal of the opponent's bishop. And now, after eliminating this e4 knight, we can play queen h5, knight f8. Here was this super nice and strange move, knight f g4, opening the bishop's diagonal, threatening either bishop takes g7 or bishop f6 or knight f6. So many moves are winning, but it's all thanks to this beautiful move. Remember that there are cases where the normal looking move is not the best. It depends on the position, what you need to achieve, and here knight 3g4 would definitely improve that knight, but it doesn't do anything about the b2 bishop. So knight 5g4, difficult to say, knight 5g4, and it's not very usual to say it. Knight 5g4 not only places our knight in a more attacking position, we're gonna play knight f6 next move, but also opens the bishop's diagonal. So it's a 2-in-1. That's why this move is much better than the other knight move. I will not show you how the game finished because instead of this, Kasparov played knight g4 immediately, and after knight e2, this position is still complicated. He won in a very nice way later on, but the point that I wanted to show you is that when we have this position, first of all, this knight d1, knight e3 maneuver that you found is very nice. And when you want to attack, you need as many attacking pieces as possible. So try to bring most of your pieces to the king side to attack the black king. Knight d1 helps the bishop on b2 and also prepares this knight e3, knight g4 maneuver. That is very nice. And also remember that this rook was on d1 and we played rook d3, rook h3 in order to attack with this rook as well, as many attacking pieces as possible. Knight on e5 protected by the pawn on f4 and the d4 pawn. Bishop on b1 to play queen d3 later, or queen c2, this queen and bishop battery, and bringing the rook on the third rank, swinging the rook from d3 to h3. These are basic attacking plans when we have hanging pawns. But now we will see another game where we will not manage to play the same way. We will not have this attacking rook on the third rank, and it will still be a very favorable position for white. So let's check this game between 2 Chinese players, Wang Hao and Lu Yiping, a player of 2500 rating. The opening we will not discuss, but it's a queen's gambit decline, the semi-dark type of position. This knight has been exchanged, so it cannot be the same anymore that we've seen before. Here, the very normal move would be castle kingside, but Wang Hao already made the most accurate move, but already. It's normal that such a strong player makes the best moves. Bishop d3 is more accurate because there's no knight on f6, So he immediately attacks the h7 pawn and asks black, what do you want to do about that pawn? How will you protect it? Will you play h6? Will you play g6? Any of these moves is a weakening, so black should play h6, g6, or f5. No matter which he chooses, he will weaken his position in some way. Also, you want to have your bishop on this diagonal and not on c4 in order to push c4. So our pawn on c3 is okay, it's protecting the d4 pawn, but when you have your pawns like this, c3 and d4, they're not very flexible. That's why many players, the good players, place the bishop almost immediately on d3 and play c4 as quickly as possible to have this flexible hanging pawns structure in the center, so you can play d5 or c5 in the right moment. And after c4, we will have the diagonal for the bishop, bishop b2, and after d5 we can open up the diagonal, but I think I'm saying too much all at once, so let's see it in practice. After h6, of course, we already castle b6, and he played queen e2. I want to ask you why playing queen e2. c4 could be considered when the pawn is not hanging, so careful, you want to play c4, but right now this pawn would be hanging, so maybe he could have played bishop b2 to prepare c4, but instead of this, he played queen e2. What is the threat after queen e2? Very good pawn grabber. There's a threat of queen, I managed to pronounce it, queen e4 would threaten mate on h7, and also the c6 knight would be hanging. So black has to defend the knight on c6 in order not to lose. And even if he doesn't blunder, because of course Wang Hao didn't count on his 2500 rated opponent blundering a piece, still queen e4 at some point of the game will be a very good move, because he's building up the same queen bishop battery that we already know. Sometimes we play bishop b1 and queen c2 or queen d3. Other times the bishop will stay on d3 and we bring the queen to e4, especially here that there's no knight on f6, so don't try to bring your queen to e4 when there's a knight on f6. That would be so bad. Just depending on the position, we play bishop b1 or we bring the queen to e4. This bishop queen diagonal battery, the b1 e7 diagonal is so important for these two pieces, so bring these two pieces onto that diagonal and attack black's king. That's the point. So we threaten queen e4. After queen c7, of course we are not winning any piece anymore. Wang Hao played rook e1 because we saw it in the first section that when you have your queen on the e5 and the rook, many times after c4 we will threaten d5, attacking that knight, and the e7 bishop can be hanging. So very nice placement of the queen and the rook on the semi-open e5. After c4, d5, this bishop could be in trouble. He played bishop d6 immediately to avoid it already in advance, and c4. So we have the hanging pawn structure. We can play d4 at some point, or c5, depends. The point is that this structure is very flexible, so black should always pay attention to those advances, the pawn advances, and we want to play bishop b2, because if the pawn is on c3, playing bishop d2, bishop b2 is not a very good move. This bishop would be just a huge pawn on b2. If it doesn't have a diagonal, don't place it there. After c4, indeed, we want to play bishop b2 because it supports this d4 pawn, and after d5, the diagonal will open up for the bishop. So this bishop on the long diagonal can be very powerful. Rook e8 was played in the game, and here you can play queen e4 in order to make black weaken his pawn structure even more. he cannot play g6 because this pawn is hanging. So he would need to play f5, but this weakens the e6 pawn. So after queen e2, we don't have this diagonal anymore for the attack, but what we achieved is something that black cannot undo. When you move a pawn, you cannot go backwards. So this pawn on e6 is going to be a backward pawn forever if he cannot exchange it. So this is a weakness. This is a new weakness in the position, and that's what white could play for. What happened in the game is bishop b2, because he knows that he can play queen e4 later too, and he will have the same idea after queen e4. Let's see why. Why I say that here in this position, white can still play queen e4. What happens if black plays g6? It seems like Wang Hao didn't want to avoid g6. He lets his opponent play g6 in this position. Tell me, how would you continue after g6? So the question is how to attack black's king. After queen e4, g6, we cannot use the diagonal anymore, but the move g6 weakened the h6 pawn. And with queen h4, very good guys, so many of you have said it, I'm so proud of you. Queen h4, a very good move because it not only threatens the pawn, but it forces black to do something about it, and at the same time it moves away the queen from the e file. So at some point when we play d5, our queen will not be hanging, and that's useful. Queen h4, we move the queen away from the e file and we attack this h6 pawn. What can black do? He can't really play king h7 because then knight g5 check will be very painful. King g7, and I'm sure that all of you can see that d5 wins a piece. Such a nice discovered check. Now you can see how useful this bishop is on b2, that long diagonal. But what happens if black doesn't blunder and he protects the pawn in a different way, because he can also play h5. And now I need you to think again. I need you to tell me how to progress, how to continue with our attack. That pawn has been saved, we cannot capture anything, and the queen on h4, well, it's okay, but we are not threatening the king directly. We will need more attacking pieces. Which one especially? The moves g6, h5, all these pawn advances have weakened squares around black's king. What color of squares and how to take advantage of those weak squares? I'll let you think a bit more because it's not so easy. So the main question is, what squares did this g6 pawn advance weaken? Which squares are weak around black's king? What color of squares to make it easier to answer? And how to take advantage of that? Some of you say g4, but you don't have to weaken your own king. If it's not necessary, don't weaken your own king. Try to attack without weakening your king. So if there's a way to attack without tearing our pawn structure apart ahead of our own king, then please don't weaken your own king when there's another way. Of course, if that's the only possible way, do it. If you give mate first, then it's all fine. But if you can attack without weakening your own king, that's even better. And that's why in this position, the right move is d5. The g6 pawn advance and also h5 have weakened the dark squares around black's king. Look at the f6 square, look at the g7 square, h8 square, h6 square. They are all weak, they are all unprotected. After d5, we are not only attacking this knight, meaning a tempo, but we also open the bishop's diagonal and we are preparing the move that many of you have said, but first we should open the diagonal and then play queen f6. After queen f6, this is another queen bishop battery, not on the b187 diagonal, but now on the long diagonal. We're gonna give mate to our poor opponent. So d5, e takes, queen f6, threatening mate either with queen g7 or queen h7. The only way to prevent mate is by playing d4. And now, very important, white is winning, but some of the possible responses to d4 are not good. So make list of move candidates. How can we respond to d4? And try to figure out which move wins the game. Because some of the moves that we can play here in this position would eventually lose for white. So be careful. Should always pay attention to the opponent's threats and his possible responses. So check this position very well. How to respond to d4, we want to give mate to our opponent, that's clear. How can we do that? I've seen the good move and I've also seen the tempting move but not the winning move. Let me start with the tempting but not winning move, which is knight takes d4. We would love to eliminate this pawn and have our bishop once again on the diagonal, threatening queen h8 or queen g7 mate. But after knight takes d4, black is not forced to play knight takes d4 too. So when you capture a pawn like this, make sure that you consider all the possible responses of your opponent. Knight takes d4 is not obligatory for black. We just pray he would play that. He will not, because he has a much better move here, which is bishop e5, and with this double attack he will win our knight. That's painful. Even if we play like queen h4 to protect the knight after queen d6, so many pieces will be hanging. The d3 knight, no, sorry, the d4 knight and the d3 bishop, they are all in the air. So now it's black who is winning. Please be careful. Of course, we want to eliminate this pawn, but knight takes d4 was not a good move because after this jump, look at the knight. It was covering the e5 square, but after knight d4, well, bishop d4 is another move, but after knight d4, bishop e5, it's already black who is playing for the full point. Careful. Also, we don't want to play bishop d4 because we don't want to give that bishop. We want to give mate with that bishop. Don't play bishop d4 because after knight takes, even though we are not losing a piece, in this position, after the exchange of these rooks, and bishop c6, suddenly black's pieces are so well placed. Look at that pair of bishops, how strong they are. The rook will come to d8. Black will capture a pawn on a3, or he will capture on f3 and the pawn on h2. And we don't have any more attack. We don't have our dark squared bishop. And in this position, what's weak in black's camp are the dark squares. We want to give mate on g7 or on h8. There's no bishop on b2 anymore. That's so sad that we cannot win this game anymore. That's why after d4, we shouldn't capture neither with the bishop nor with the knight on d4. The winning move is what many of you have said. Bishop takes g4. G4. Bishop takes g6. I don't know what I'm saying anymore. Bishop takes g6. First, we sacrifice the pawn and then a piece. Because after f takes, queen takes, king h8. Tell me what's the easiest way to win? What's the best move here? I'm sure that those of you who have suggested bishop takes g6 so that in this position we can either play. What can we play? We have several good options. but perhaps the easiest is the one that would give mate into, and that's knight g5. So we can capture this pawn with check, but it's not necessary. We can also capture this pawn now, finally. But the best move and the most effective one is knight g5 because we threaten mate with two different ways actually. It's queen h7 mate or knight f7 mate, and that's why black cannot prevent it because he cannot protect both of those squares, and bishop takes h2 is just a check. We move our king away, and now black will have to give up his queen for the knight. For instance, with bishop g4, he will have to play knight f7, queen takes f7, but I'm sure that with a queen up you can win the game, so we will not discuss this position anymore. The other possibility after bishop takes g6, f takes, queen takes is king f8. But once again the same move works. Knight g5, threatening queen f7 mate or knight h7 mate. It seems like knight e5 could do something about it, at least covering the e file, but now it's mating too anyway with knight h7 and queen f6. So well done everybody who played bishop takes g6 in this position. And always be careful, please. White is winning here, but neither knight takes d4 nor bishop takes d4 were good moves. The only way to win this position was bishop takes g6. So always pay attention to the opponent's possibilities and make sure that when you calculate a line, you don't only calculate the move that you want your opponent to play, but all the possible moves. And here after knight d4, you should definitely not think that knight takes d4 is the only move for black because he also has bishop e5, which is a much better move for black. That's why after queen e4, g6 was a bad move. He didn't play it. The opponent of Wang Hao, Lo Yiping, this name is a bit difficult for me. So g6 was bad because of queen h4 and all that we saw after h5, d5, opening the diagonal, queen f6. This is all that we analyzed. What about queen e4, f5? Because we said in the other position that black can close this diagonal with f5. Well, the point is that we're just gonna go back with the queen. We can go back with a queen, we can retreat with the queen, but the pawn will never be able to go back to f7. And that means what I already mentioned, that this e6 pawn will be a backward pawn forever. It will be a weakness forever unless black can exchange it, but white will make sure that this pawn will not disappear unless we win this pawn. So after f5, queen e2, we need a new plan. We have managed to provoke a weakness. This e6 backward pawn is our new target. But how can we approach this pawn? How can we attack it? The queen and the rook are already on the semi-open e file, but it's not enough. How could we prepare a way to attack this pawn on e6, this weakness in black's camp, with even more pieces? Some of you are suggesting c5, which is what we want to play, but let's prepare it because white's pieces are still not developed. I mean, not all of them are developed. So let's make sure that all our pieces are playing. Where to place the rook in order to prepare what we want to play. You already know that you want to play for c5, so it's very easy to know now where we need our rook to play c5, which is, of course, rook c1. And that's what we will see. Black play knight e7, trying to regroup his pieces. You know that when you are playing against the hanging pawns, you have less space, so it's not so easy to find active play for your pieces. That's why he's trying to regroup his pieces, play bishop c6 later on. And we just play rook a c1. We want to play c5, because after c5, We will soon see what we have. Rook a c1. We are preparing c5. We don't have to play c5 immediately. If we can prepare it, why not prepare it? And here, I just want to show you that if black plays a silly move like a6, now of course c5 would be such a strong move. He cannot capture this pawn because of the pin on the c file. But what about playing rook a c8 with black? Would it prevent c5? Think about it. Calculate c5 in this position. Calculate if black can capture the pawn on c5 after c5, b takes, d takes. Can he play bishop takes c5 and say that he has a pawn up? I let you calculate a bit more. So c5, can we still play c5? We want to play c5, can we? Very good, we can still play c5 because after c5, b takes, d takes, bishop c5. We don't have the same way of winning the piece with bishop d4 because the queen can go away and now this bishop is protected, so careful. Bishop d4 is not a good move, but you are right that first we can play bishop a6, forcing black to leave the ca square with his rook, and after the rook moves, no matter where he goes, we will have bishop d4. So very good. Congrats to all of you who have seen that after c5, capture, we will have, oh, let me click on it, bishop takes c5, bishop a6, a very important move. First we want that rook to go away from the c file and then we win a piece with bishop d4. That's why after rook a c1, black tried to play knight g6. He wants to create some kind of counterplay with knight f4 and we could play c5 and calculate all that complication after what happens if c5, knight f4, what happens if c5, bishop f4. But if you can play in a more simple way, then do it. Why to enter complications if you can avoid it? c5 is a move that black cannot really prevent. So we will play c5, but we don't have to do it right now. We can first avoid the opponent's threats and then continue with our plan. So what shall we do about this knight f4 or bishop f4 moves? Of course, we can play g3 first. Very good, guys. First thing first, preventing the opponent's threats. Then we continue with our plan. It's not necessary to calculate all kinds of complicated lines if there are moves like g3. Protecting the f4 square, so there's no knight f4, no bishop f4. So after c5, black will have to retreat with his bishop. Bishop c6 was played, and now, of course, c5. And we wanted to play c5 because, well, it's good to break through with the hanging pawns in the right moment if we can. But also, after c5, we have freed the c4 square for our bishop. And that is the main point of c5. We've got the queen and the rook here, attacking the backward pawn. And after bishop c4, oh, this pawn will be suffering so much. It's about to fall. Let's see what happened in the game. c5. Black could capture on c5 if he wanted with the pawn, but it would not help but only worsen things for him. It would open up the diagonal for our bishop. So this is definitely an exchange that favors only white. Therefore, if you're playing with black, at least try to make it more difficult for your opponent to win the game Let's not open the diagonal for the b2 bishop because that's what white wants. So b takes c5 is something that black shouldn't play. He moved the bishop correctly, going back with it. And now, of course, bishop c4. That was the whole point. We prepared c5, and now after bishop c4, this poor backward pawn is hanging. Black has to protect it. And now, once again, we need to think, because we are attacking this pawn with 3 pieces. So if we capture, let's see, this capture, does it work? We need to calculate. Rook takes, queen takes, and either queen takes or bishop takes f3. That means 2 minor pieces for the rook. 2 minor pieces for the rook and the pawn. It's the same material. We didn't really win anything. That's why after queen f7, we don't want to play bishop e6. It's not winning. But we do want to improve our pieces even further. And the advance f5 didn't only weaken the e6 square, the e6 pawn, but it also weakened the e5 square. That's such a big hole in the opponent's camp. The only piece that is protecting the square is the g6 knight. So, can you imagine a scenario where the g6 knight is somewhere else, not protecting the e5 square, and we simply jump to e5 with our knight? It would be a very beautiful outpost for our knight. How can we make the g6 knight go away? Let me see if you have found the move, and you did. You're so quick today. Thank you, guys. You are geniuses, all of you. I'm so proud of you. You all tell me the best moves all the time, and I'm sure that even if you're not typing in the chat, you have thought about this move. h4, h5 is the right plan because we want this knight to be somewhere else. And not only that we want it somewhere else, but if you consider where can this knight jump from g6, not really anywhere. Like, it cannot go to f4, cannot go to h4, cannot go to e5. If it moves to e7, then it will cover the e5 from the rook, so we can capture on e6 and win a queen. And if after h5 black has to go to h8 with his knight, then it would be like the poorest knight in the world, because a knight on the rim is already pretty bad, but if it's a knight in the corner, that's just a really ridiculous piece. So we are threatening to make this piece a horrible piece, a horrible piece with h5. Very, very strong idea, h4, h5. And yes, we are pushing a pawn in front of our king, we are weakening our king, but it is really worth it so that black will have a horrible knight, and we will have this e5 square for our knight. What black played is what is the best continuation, bishop d5, because of course he wants this pawn to be protected, and if we capture on d5, that's something that would favor him. Suddenly this backward pawn would disappear, the e5 opens, so you don't want to exchange bishops on d5. The bishop on d5 is good for black. That's why sometimes these c5 pushes are not so recommendable for white, depending on the position. Here it's good because the d5 bishop is the only good piece for black, and after h5 we just continue with our plan. Now, yes, he can go to e7 because the pawn, oh sorry, what am I doing? Bishop d5, h5. He can go to e7 because the pawn on e6 is not hanging anymore, but after knight e5, this is the outpost we wanted. An outpost is a square that is in a very advanced place, usually in the center, and it's a piece. Well, if you place a piece on the outpost, many times it's the knight is perfect on an outpost, it cannot be chased away because This e5 square is a hole in black's position. There's no pawn that could kick our knight away from e5. That's why it is an outpost. And you want to have a minor piece, usually a knight on an outpost. It is an extremely strong piece on the outpost. And after queen f6, there are already several ways to win the game. Not immediately, but at least win material or make black suffer a lot. For instance, bishop b5 would have been one of the ways to just simply create a very strong passed pawn. The c6 pawn cannot be captured. It is supported by the e5 knight. We are threatening to play c7 and bishop a6, so this pawn is about to be promoted. This was one of the ways to win the game. And the other is what Wang Hao played. He simply wanted to win this backward pawn, the e6 pawn. And the way to do it is knight d7, queen f7, and now he can play queen takes e6. I know, it looks like a crazy move. We are like losing our queen, but no, we are not losing our queen. This is such an aesthetical move. After bishop takes e6, bishop takes, we win the queen back, and we have won a pawn in total. So this is an endgame with a pawn up for white. Let me just show you once again the position. This is where we have either bishop b5 and c6, very good continuation, or what Wang Hao chose, knight d7, queen f7, and queen takes e6. Cool, isn't it? Bishop takes, knight d5 was played in the game, and after bishop f7, king f7, rook e5. Now both the knight and the pawn are hanging, so he has to capture on e5, but now we have a new passed pawn, an e-passed pawn. This is basically winning after e6. If he captures this pawn, then knight f8 and c takes, bishop g7 will win the game. Now we are 2 pawns up. So this is it, 2 pawns up. White won the game after e6, king e7, and rook d1. So either the b6 pawn will drop, or what we saw after king e6, capture and knight f8. He will capture on g7 and on h6 and win with 2 pawns up and having a very strong passed pawn, the h5 passed pawn. What is the point of this game? What you should learn from this game is that we played queen e2 at an early stage of the game, because when there's no knight on f6, you can build up this queen bishop battery by keeping the bishop on d3 and placing the queen on e4. So that's what happened in the game. The rook on the e file, later we play c4, the bishop on b2, and queen e4. And if black plays f5, it's true that we cannot give mate anymore, and that's a pity. But as we mentioned, now there's a new weakness, a new target, the e6 backward pawn. So we change our plan completely. Now we are not attacking the king directly, but we want to attack this pawn. We played rook c1, we played c5 in order to place our bishop on c4, attacking this weak backward pawn, and also f5 weakened the e5 square, which later on became a beautiful outpost for our knight. And before we finish, and before I let you go and have a break, because soon this show will be over, but only for an hour, so that you can have a rest until 8:30, because that's when the training tournament will begin. For premium members, we have a special training tournament about what we've learned. So you will have a hanging pawns position, either with white or playing with black against these hanging pawns. And I'll be commentating the tournament, so make sure you sign up for the thematic tournament. I'll be here from around 8:15 live. I'll be talking to you, commentating the games, analyzing what you do well and things that you can improve, because it's necessary to practice. It's good that you are here studying with me, but you should also put these thoughts, these ideas into practice. And that's why I want you to play hanging pawn structures, hanging pawn positions in this training tournament. So several times during the month, each month, you will have training tournaments with me live. And before we begin our break session and then the tournament, there's one more idea I want to show you from this game, Korobov against Matieja. And I will jump straight to it because what I want you to see is that, okay, let's see from here. Isolated pawn. You know that isolated pawn positions are very similar to hanging pawn positions because it can transpose to one another after bishop takes, b takes. There we go, hanging pawns from an isolated pawn position. And here, the usual plan is c4, bishop b2. That's what we've learned in all these games. But I want to show you that if you prefer, you can also play with bishop g5. Because here, after c4 and knight e5, the same plan. We want this knight on e5. If black captures this knight and moves away with the knight, then we can still have a horribly strong attack. Queen h5, now threatening on h7. So after g6, the dark squares are so weak, and we have a dark square bishop. Black doesn't have a dark square bishop. That's not good news. After queen h6, we are threatening bishop f6 and mate on g7. The only way to prevent this mate is by playing queen c5 and queen f8, but, well, this position is quite unpleasant for black. Still, black had to play this because after queen h5, knight f8, once again the same plan. We bring the rook on the third rank, and when black played queen c6, threatening mate on g2, rook g3 is a move that defends and attacks at the same time. So here, after rook c7, we already have a way to finish the game. Try to find the best move in this position for white. How can we win this game? We have four attacking four attacking pieces against one defender, the f8 knight. That's a big majority in favor of our attack. So it usually means that there's a direct way to finish the game. There's usually a sacrifice that wins. You need to calculate which one and how to carry it out. Bishop f6 is a very tempting move, but it doesn't win immediately because black can play knight g6. If he had to play g6, of course, it would be very good. Queen h6, you know this, mate on g7. But unfortunately, after bishop f6, he can play knight g6 and still hold on. He can protect the g7 pawn with knight g6, after which I think the best move is to go back with the bishop because it was already hanging. Here, instead of bishop f6, we have a spectacular sacrifice. Which sacrifice do you think could work? Hi, Nicholas. I think you've already found the winning move. I'm very happy that even GMs joined my show. I'm a bit turning red, but I'm very happy that my colleagues are also here watching the show. And of course, bishop takes h7 is such a strong move. The point is that I think Nicholas can tell you after knight h7, what did you want to play, Nicholas? No, guys, he's not spoiling the show. He's simply helping us to learn because it's very nice that we have the support of a grandmaster. Bishop f6 is, of course, the right idea. And no matter what black plays, he will be mated. Let's just see a final trick. After queen c4, this is what happened in the game. Rook g7, king f8. How shall we finish the game? What's the way to win? Careful, because you always need to be precise and you always need to take into account the opponent's threats. So let's not blunder. What is the threat of black? try to find the attacking move that prevents black's threats and also wins the game. And this time I will not let you, Nicholas, to tell the others the move. So, Nicholas, it's too late to tell you. Queen a6, of course. And guys, be careful. Queen takes a7 was also a tempting move, but you will be mated after queen c1. So the way to avoid all this is queen a6. We protect this square. And now we are threatening with any rook move. That would be a mate. And after rook c8, rook g8, king takes, and queen g7 will be a mate. After rook g8, of course, Mathieu resigned because there's no point to let your opponent give a mate, at least not on GM level. So this is all for today's lecture, but don't go anywhere. Now you have an hour of break, after which I'll be back. And before I leave, actually, and before you all leave, I'd like you to sign up for the training tournament. Remember, it begins at 8:30, but you better be here a bit before because I will give you some last tips and instructions. I'll be here live again from around 8:15, 8:20. So make sure you come back to this show, watch the show once again live from 8:15. I will help you a bit about what you can expect from the position that you need to play. And I will also give you tips to play the position with black because most of the ideas we have seen were ideas with the hanging pawns with white in this case. But you also need to try to prevent the opponent's threats, and you also need to know how to play this position with black if you have to play against the hanging pawns. So first, sign up for a tournament. I'm gonna copy the link again. This is where you can... Why I cannot copy this link? Now, I think I managed. I copied it twice. Okay, I'm gonna copy it once again, separately. So, I think it works, yeah. Please click on that link. That's where you can sign up for the premium training tournament on the hanging pawns. As I told you, each month, several times, we will have training tournaments with me. I'll be commentating live your games. I'll be checking if you were a good pupil and if you managed to apply the plans we have learned from these shows. Also, if you are too shy to play, then just come back and follow the event. You can still enjoy the show. I'm gonna be commentating everything that happens on the board and away from the board. So please be here once again from around 8:20. The tournament begins at 8:30 Central European Time. You have an hour of break because it would be too much of me if we had everything in a row. You need to have a rest, I think. Take a tea like me. If you have a chess 24 mug, even better, but even without the chess 24 mug, have a snack, take some tea, coffee, water, anything that will help you play better the training tournament. So click on that link, sign up for a tournament. I'll be back from around 8:15. See you then. Make sure you sign up for the tournament. Bye bye.